In the world of personal finance, it's remarkably common to see people fixate on factors they can't control, like trying to time the market or pick a winning stock. In doing so, they often neglect the elements that are entirely within their power, such as setting the right goals and crafting a solid long-term plan. This misdirection frequently leads to mistakes. While some missteps are minor, the biggest ones can be the difference between living paycheck to paycheck for life and building a comfortable financial future. This first mistake might be controversial, and I feel a little hesitant bringing it up, but I don't believe it gets nearly enough attention: not earning enough money. I understand this isn't entirely within your control. Luck, including the family and country you're born into, can have a significant impact. And while income inequality is a complex societal issue, the fact remains that for many people, especially when you're young, your human capital is your most valuable asset. That is, your ability to generate income through work or by starting a business. Investing in your human capital, whether through formal education or learning a skilled trade, can increase your expected lifetime earnings, a fairly obvious benefit. But it can also make your income more resilient during economic downturns. On average, higher levels of education correlate with higher incomes. Historically, education in fields like engineering, healthcare, and business has tended to be more economically rewarding than others. Perhaps AI will disrupt that trend. We will see. Regardless, I'm quite happy to have an engineering degree. Advanced credentials, such as the CFA Charter in Finance, also tend to boost average incomes even further. More education doesn't guarantee a higher income, but it does improve the distribution of potential income levels you can expect to access. Furthermore, income and education are linked to all sorts of other important metrics, like happiness, at least up to a point, and both lifespan and health span. The years you live in good health. Again, how much any given person earns is a complex issue. Education costs both time and money. And aside from that, you should never choose a career you dislike simply because it pays well. As always, personal finance is personal. That said, it's crucial to recognize that no amount of frugality can fully offset the effects of a low income. Unsurprisingly, studies show that financial well-being increases steadily with rising household income. Finding ways to save money is important, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But finding ways to boost your earnings is one of the most powerful things you can do for your financial health. The next major mistake is not saving enough. If you've been successful in boosting your income above the minimum level required to live, it's imperative that you save a portion of those earnings for a future when you may want or need to stop working. In addition to being essential for goals like retirement, the act of saving money is strongly correlated with financial well-being at all income levels. There's no single perfect amount to save, but there are some useful guidelines. Someone with a very aggressive savings goal, like early retirement, might save a huge portion of their income. In contrast, someone who plans to work until a traditional retirement age might save less. Similarly, an individual starting to save later in life will need to set aside a much larger percentage of their income than someone who starts early. A common rule of thumb that gets tossed around is to save 10% of your income, in addition to contributions to government pension plans like the CPP in Canada or Social Security in the US. This is probably reasonable advice. One academic paper found that a 10% savings rate from age 25 to 65, invested in a 100% stock portfolio, 1/3 domestic, 2/3 international, resulted in an average retirement income, including Social Security, that was actually above their working year's income. Another 2011 study in the Journal of Financial Planning used historical data to calculate the minimum savings rate needed to retire, even in the worst-case historical scenarios. It's similar to the 4% rule for retirement spending, but flipped on its head. The crucial insight from that research is that if you wanted to work for 40 years and then live in retirement for 40 years with a 70% income replacement rate, this analysis excluded Social Security. You would need to save a minimum of 28% of your income throughout your working years. If you want to work fewer years, replace a higher portion of your income, or hold a more conservative investment portfolio, you need to save a significantly higher percentage. I'll come back to that point. Figuring out the exact amount you should be saving really requires sitting down with a good financial planning calculator or a financial planner. It involves mapping out your long-term goals so you can chart a clear path to get there. It also requires juggling priorities. For example, a young family paying for daycare or prioritizing family experiences might reasonably decide to save less now with a plan to save more later. Speaking of goals, not setting them is another one of the biggest mistakes in personal finance. People make wild and rudderless financial decisions when they don't have at least a rough idea of where they want to end up. It's worth thinking hard about the financial goals you want to set, which isn't always as easy as it sounds. If I ask you what your financial goals are, you probably won't be able to give me a complete answer, even if you think you can. It's a strange thing to consider. When prompted properly, people often realize that the goals they've set for themselves fall short of what they truly care about. There are a couple of methods to elicit more meaningful goals. One is using categorical prompts, showing people categories that financial goals might fit into. Another is the use of a master list, which is a comprehensive list of goals collected from many different people. In 2022, I conducted a study where I asked 310 people to write down their goals. They were then asked to double their list and were subsequently presented with the PERMA-V model of well-being as potential goal categories. PERMA-V stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, with the V representing vitality. When you ask someone for their goals, they might say, "I want to retire." But when you explain that goals can fit into these 6 categories, they tend to come up with more meaningful objectives that get closer to what really matters to them. Using the data from my study, Morningstar's behavioral research team, and it was pretty cool that they used our data, found through natural language processing that after being introduced to the PERMA-V model, people tended to list deeper goals that reflected their core values, rather than more surface-level goals like simply wanting to retire. My study also resulted in a master list of goals that people can still find on the PWL Capital website. This list can be used in addition to the PERMA-V prompts as part of a structured goal-setting process. Understanding your true goals is critical because the path to achieving them might be very different from the path to some other surface-level goal, or, even worse, the uncharted path of just doing whatever feels right in the moment. Related to setting the right goals and to saving, another critical mistake is overspending on the wrong things. Spending money often feels good. Acquiring new material possessions provides a temporary lift, at least for a while. The problem is that people adapt to these feelings quite quickly. Even a major upgrade like a fancier new house will typically only make you happier for a short period. The reason is simple. Our happiness is largely shaped by our minute-to-minute experiences, not by our stable life circumstances, which we eventually adapt to. The issue is that people are generally not good at predicting what will make them happy in the future. They tend to imagine that things, often material objects, will boost their happiness far more than they actually will. Consider a potential major purchase like a cottage or a boat. I'm not saying these are inherently bad purchases, but stick with me for the example. When you imagine owning them, you tend to picture sunny days on the beach where everyone is happy and getting along. The boat is running perfectly, and the cottage needs no repairs. Those days certainly exist. But so does sitting in traffic on a sweaty Friday afternoon trying to get out of the city, with kids fighting in the back seat. So does the boat not starting or needing constant maintenance. And so does having to rush to the cottage on a weekday because a pipe burst. Again, I'm not saying don't buy a cottage or a boat, but I think it's vital to consider the full time and money trade-offs associated with any major expense. How you spend your time will affect your happiness far more than what you own. People who value their time over money tend to be happier, make more frequent social connections, enjoy stronger relationships with their spouses, and report higher job satisfaction. The other way this appears in financial decision-making is that, all else being equal, spending less money today gives you more ownership of your time in the future. While we are required to work, we are trading our time for money out of necessity. Work has many non-financial benefits, and I'm not anti-work by any means. But being able to choose how you spend your time and the kind of work you do is an incredibly powerful position to be in. Spending less today on stuff that doesn't truly make you happy will get you to that position sooner. This highlights the compounding, long-term effects of suboptimal spending today. For any purchase, consider what you are actually trying to accomplish with those dollars and whether there are more efficient uses of your time and money to achieve that same outcome. Think about how spending your money now will change how you spend your time, both today and in the distant future. Related to the compounding effects of poor spending is another major mistake: not taking enough risk with your investments. Risk can sound scary, but taking the right amount of the right kinds of risk is one of the most important things you can do as an investor. Taking on market risk by owning stocks rather than just bonds or cash in a diversified portfolio leads to higher expected returns and, historically, has delivered higher realized returns over long periods. The returns available in financial markets are there for the taking, but they require you to accept risk. But what even is risk? It's usually framed as volatility. Volatility is certainly a psychological risk, but for a long-term investor who doesn't need to spend their money tomorrow, I don't think it's the best measure of risk. I think many people get scared by the concept because they imagine losing all or a lot of their money. When markets are volatile, it can certainly feel like that's about to happen. Or maybe they did lose all their money trying to pick winning stocks or crypto tokens. However, a total loss is an extremely unlikely outcome for an investor who owns a broad cross-section of all publicly traded stocks in the world through a low-cost index fund. Don't get me wrong, stocks do not guarantee a good long-term outcome. They are still risky, but the expected outcome from investing in stocks is far superior to that of bonds or cash. The implied cost of not investing in stocks is enormous. To put it in terms of the savings rates I mentioned earlier, to match the expected retirement outcome of someone who saved 10% of their income in a 100% globally diversified stock portfolio, you would need to save significantly more if you were more conservative. If you invested in a typical target date fund, which aggressively increases its bond allocation over time, you would need to save 63% more, or 16% of your income. If you held a traditional 60-40 portfolio, you'd need to save 19% of your income, nearly double the 100% stock investor. Where it gets truly crazy is with government bills. If you were just holding your money in a high-interest savings account instead of investing in stocks, you would need to save a staggering 57% of your income to match the expected outcome of the global stock investor's 10% savings rate. Getting comfortable with taking risk is a good thing, but it's dangerously easy to take the wrong kinds of risk, which is another major personal finance mistake. Trying to pick individual stocks, searching for the next Bitcoin before it moons, and using options to bet on short-term price movements are more akin to gambling than investing. I would define gambling as any activity with a negative expected return but the possibility of occasional wins due to luck. Investing, in contrast, has a positive expected return with the possibility of some bumps along the way. The critical difference is that while you can win with gambling, it does happen. The longer you play, the more likely you are to lose. Just spend 10 minutes reading Wall Street bets if you need proof. With investing, the longer you play, the more likely you are to come out ahead. Investing is usually pretty boring. If you already have a low-cost, diversified portfolio, the next great challenge is not getting distracted by all the financial products, advertisements, and news headlines designed to entice you into making negative expected return bets. As I mentioned, it's possible to win while gambling, which can lead you to believe that you're really smart. But it's important to remember what Daniel Kahneman said about expertise in investing. It's very difficult to imagine, from a psychological analysis of what expertise is, that you can develop true expertise in, say, predicting the stock market. You cannot, because the world isn't sufficiently regular for people to learn its rules. If you do end up on the winning side of a trade, you might consider trading your luck on a negative expected return gamble for the positive expected returns of a diversified portfolio. A man in British Columbia YOLO'd a Tesla options play from $88,000 to $415 million before losing everything. Everything is obvious in hindsight, but a little diversification would have gone a long way there. The longer you stay in the casino, the more likely you are to lose. Missing tax planning opportunities is another big mistake. Paying your fair share of taxes is one thing, but there are government-sanctioned tax planning opportunities designed for people to use. They represent a rare free lunch. The benefits of tax planning also depend less on the uncertain future returns of financial markets. Some examples include income splitting with lower-income family members, optimizing the use of registered investment accounts like the RRSP and TFSA in Canada, donating appreciated securities from a taxable account rather than donating cash, and maximizing the use of the primary residence exemption. There are even more examples for people with corporations. Even simple things, like choosing the right tax year to claim your RRSP deduction, can have a big impact. Similar to and related to tax planning, ignoring estate planning is another major misstep. An improper estate plan can lead not only to tax inefficiency and liquidity problems at death, but also to added anguish for your surviving loved ones. One of the most significant impacts of creating an estate plan is ensuring your estate is set up to achieve your objectives. Without an estate plan, or, at the extreme, without a will in place at all, there are prescribed legal rules for how your assets will be distributed. The problem is that those rules are often at odds with what most people would choose for themselves. With proper planning, everyone has that choice while they are alive. Another huge mistake that can be incredibly damaging, both financially and psychologically, is marrying a financially incompatible spouse. Research has identified two broad spending profiles: tightwads and spendthrifts. Tightwads feel a pain when spending money, while spendthrifts enjoy it. The crazy thing is that tightwads and spendthrifts are statistically more likely to marry each other than someone with a similar spending style. Opposites attract in this case, I guess. The problem is that the more spouses differ on this spending dimension, the more they tend to fight over money and the more marital dissatisfaction they report. Spouses with similar spending profiles tend to be happier. Financial disagreements are already one of the strongest predictors of divorce, and divorce can be financially devastating. This is messy stuff. The tightwad spendthrift trait is pretty stable over time. So if you're considering committing to someone whose financial tendencies bother you, just know that they probably won't change. Underinsuring against catastrophic risks is another big personal finance mistake. By its nature, insurance has a negative expected return. It has to for insurance companies to stay in business. Despite this, it makes perfect sense to buy insurance for risks that, if they were to materialize, would be financially impossible for you or your family to recover from. For example, when you have financial dependence but are not yet financially independent, it is critical to have life insurance to replace your future earnings in the event of an untimely death. Disability insurance is also crucial to protect your future earnings, whether you have dependents or not. Nobody likes to think about death or disability, but failing to plan for these unfortunate events can be financially catastrophic. Covered calls. No, I'm just joking. FP Canada, the credentialing body that issues the CFP in Canada, defines 6 core areas of financial planning. These, at the very least, require conversations about these common mistakes. Going through the comprehensive financial planning process with a qualified planner is highly likely to reduce mistakes and improve your expected outcomes.